What was once a cornfield now sits a sprawling campus known as Redemption Christian Church. In small town rural southern Indiana 23 years ago, an upstart church began with a handful of people, and God has grown it to an impactful church of more than 2,000 with campuses in 3 towns. How did this happen? What did God use to not just make a church grow, but create a movement of Christ followers who are brought into the mission of loving God, loving people, and changing the world? This is the Redemption Story, a series of programs in association with Redemption Christian Church and the Kevin R. Smith Company that attempts to tell a bit of the story of what God has done and is doing at and through Redemption Christian Church. Well, Darrell, we get a chance to meet another member of the Redemption team as we continue with the Redemption story. And finally, somebody with something on top of his head.
That's right. Got a little hair.
For now.
But he has 2 small kids, so we'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah, it's turning gray on me slowly but surely, but I'll take that as long as it sticks around.
Well, gee, thanks for being with us.
Yeah.
We appreciate you very much, brother. And I know you're a valued member of the team at Redemption. And, when we started this Redemption Story podcast, video cast, one of the things Darrell's was very focused on. This isn't going to be about me, about him in that aspect. And he's very humble in that regard, in that setting. But talk a little bit, and we're going to ask Darrell to come back on the other side. What attracted you in the beginning to come to Jasper and Redemption?
Yeah, when Darrell first reached out to me, I was a student minister at a church up in Indianapolis, and I was loving what I did. I'd done student ministry for probably a decade at that point, and kind of thought this is what I was always going to do. But I'd hired a guy who was connected to Camp Ileana, and of course that's a big part of Redemption and what's going on here and our students. And he was asking me if I'd want to come in and kind of preach a week of their camp with students. And so I was like, yeah, I'd love to do that. And so I came in, got to speak with them and meet a lot of the folks at Redemption. And I still remember night one getting ready to preach. And this bald guy who I didn't know came up and said, hey, I want to pray with you before you go up. And I thought that was really cool. And so he prayed for me, for the message, for how students would receive it. And that was Ryan Stiles. And I got to know him over the course of the week, got to meet Darrell and some other guys, and just saw a lot of the heart behind who Redemption was. And so left that week not thinking anything of it, just a cool week and a cool experience. And it wasn't long after that I was actually at CIY leading my students from my church, and I got a text message from Darrell kind of asking if I'd be interested in this position. And he knew Drew was leaving, and needed another teaching pastor. And so, yeah, we started talking from there.
Yep. Yeah, I think maybe Corey and Ryan both texted me the first night of camp, said, you got to come over and talk to this guy. We got to talk to this guy. So even before I had ever heard LG preach or met him, they were very interested in, because we knew Drew didn't have a timetable now, but we knew he was going to Boston, to New England to plant. And so anyway, we started priming the pump for that early. And so I did reach out to him. And I think at that time, LG said, you know what, I'll pray about it, think about it. And we didn't really talk for probably
maybe a couple months or so.
A couple months.
Might have been longer.
Yeah, and then it got real to us that Drew was leaving. It's like, okay, it's time to reach out. And the guy that actually introduced LG to the camp said, hey, I would give him a call. I would give him a text. And so that's kind of how that started. Yeah. And the rest is history. He came, and who couldn't want to be here, right?
Yeah, the lovable LG, right?
That's right.
Lovable LG. But Darrell, that's a critical aspect when it comes to replacing staff members, in particular the role that's going to be on stage when Darrell is not, at times when Darrell is in that regard. Yeah. Talk a little bit about your perspective, the perspective of the elders when it comes to hiring and filling a role such as the one LG filled here.
Yeah, well, they have to be a high-capacity teacher. That's for sure, because we don't want any level of drop-off when we have people there. Not that I'm the greatest thing, but people are used to whatever is there, and so it has to be that. But I also think one of the things we look for is somebody that has the same philosophy of preaching, but the different approach to preaching. Like if you're just going to have somebody that preaches like Darrell, it's not much of a dynamic change each week, and so therefore it becomes kind of like a monotone. If you listen to a recording and it's the same all the way through, you kind of lose interest. And so I think to be able, and plus we also wanted it to be a little bit multi-generational. LG's 9, 10 years younger than me.
Oh, at least 10.
10, yeah. So people think he's 20 years younger than me. He's not. And so there's that generational aspect. So I think he probably reaches a group of people that, would enjoy hearing him more than they would me. And I'm sure there's some on the other side of that too. And so it's kind of nice but it's gotten to the point where when you do it about as equally as we do, that nobody cares that the other one's up there. They feel like they can get something to take away for any one of us and any one of our staff members for that perspective, because we try to squeeze campus pastors and other staff in throughout the year as well. So, but that's what we look for. Look for somebody that's a strong teacher, different. And generally speaking, a different age than what the senior pastor is going to be.
Now, Gee, we're going to talk a bit more about your past and what led you into ministry in that aspect. But what Daryl just commented on, how difficult was it to adapt to redemption or to adapt to the environment, but yet keep the autonomy of who LG was?
Yeah, I think getting started here, you're moving from students to adults, and you worry a little bit about, like, how's this going to be received, and, how are people going to approach this? And I'll be honest, I don't know that I changed my approach a ton. What I found was that preaching to students is way harder. And adults, they're leaning in a little bit more. They're listening more closely, and so they learn a little bit more easily in some ways. And so student ministry was a great training ground, I think, for what I was stepping into here long before I knew that. And so I think in that way it set me up pretty well. And then what I learned at Redemption was just that the people here are so encouraging. And they want you to succeed so much. And that's probably true of a lot of places, but they really show it here, just the encouragement they bring. People want to tell you, you did a great job, I love what you brought this morning, and they love the back and forth between me and Daryl, and so there's a lot of fun with that. It's been an easy place, I think, to grow and to kind of improve at what you're doing.
So it seems like just been natural for LG in that adaptation.
I think they made it easy for me. I think it says a lot more about the church than it does me in that respect.
Well, talking about the church and the time, Daryl, after that 2-month hiatus from the time you all met and talked a little bit, talk about your process as far as your decision-making piece. You were working in student ministry, felt that was going to be it, but then something changed.
Yeah, so like I said, I'd been doing student ministry for probably 10 years at that point, somewhere around there. And, you do think, when you're in that, and it's like, all right, I'm doing this, I love what I'm doing, I enjoy it. Felt like in some ways like it was going really well. I was at a great church, a healthy church. But I've always said I feel like you almost grow up with a generation of people. And so the same students that I started with, back then out of Bible college, or the age of people that I'm now, kind of preaching to in adult ministry. And so you kind of get to a point where it's like, I feel like it's not so much moving on from something else, or it's not a stepping stone to something bigger. It was just a natural progression of how God's using me.
Outstanding, and we've not been disappointed.
No, not at all. In fact, each time we've hired a teaching minister, we've been really blessed and pleased. But obviously, LG has been here the longest, believe it or not, of any of our teaching ministers.
It's crazy.
And it is weird to think about, and it's just a natural fit. Like, he is now synonymous with redemption, just like I would be, and so people think of that, and it's really been cool to see. And what's cool about that, when you stay that long, and I think this is his first ministry to do that, certainly this is my first ministry to do that, is you start seeing kids grow up, and I've literally did weddings for kids that I baptized when they were kids, or remember when they were born, and it's just the crazy life cycle of the church. It's a neat part, but he just fell right into that right off the bat. People loved him, and then of course, and him finding Michaela and getting married added a staff member to us too, because she does a great job in our family ministry.
That's probably the main thing I brought to Redemption.
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't know
multiplying leadership,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. So yeah, and so I think that's one of the things I always try to get other preachers, guys that are primary preaching ministers, senior ministers, is you have to share your pulpit, and we don't use a pulpit here, but that phrase, you have to share the platform and teaching. It makes the church so much stronger, and it adds so much to you, because you're able then on your off weeks to focus in on leading people, pastoring people, doing things, maybe looking ahead to some things, and we really like that. Like our off weeks, we're generally, like I just stepped into LG's office this morning, and he's working on something for coming up down the road just administratively, and it's just great because you have time to do that and focus in, because you want to spend a good 10 to 15 hours minimal on a sermon each week, and if you're doing that every week, you don't have time to do other things. So it's been great.
Oh yeah, stepping into this kind of model where we get to share the teaching platform, I can't imagine not having that margin and still being able to kind of get other things done and grow and learn the way you want to be able to continue teaching. Yeah, it's been really, really cool.
Well, I thought to myself, not to make this about that, but I thought to myself, well, what was lacking when I did it 47 to 50 times a year? And because something had to give. Well, I didn't. I still did all the pastoral visits. I still did every meeting. What give? And when I think back to it, and I think we've talked a little bit about this in the past, is like my family's what was neglected the most. Like during my younger kids' age, like when my kids were younger, my wife did all the heavy lifting, and so anyway, that's kind of I try to get pastors to do that, and they're a little resistant. I think they're always afraid. Maybe they feel threatened by it, but it's never bothered me any. So, but yeah.
So LG, you make the decision to join Redemption. Talk about that transition period and that window of what went through your mind, what all you laid out when you first stepped on that stage for that first message, so it would go the way you wanted it to.
Yeah. So if you walk into Redemption, especially at the Jasper campus, it's a large stage. And I found, you get up there, and as much as you've talked in front of people or as many sermons you've preached, there's a lot of nerves and butterflies that are going on there, and you want to make a good first impression. People always say, the first impression and the last impression are the most important. That's what people are going to remember and kind of, think of you by. And so I remember stepping up there, and I'll never forget that first Sunday, Daryl's introducing me, and he goes to start talking. And in true Redemption fashion, the microphone didn't work. And so he's trying to talk, and mine's on, so I just had to step in and start talking, and we laughed about it and shared a microphone for a minute. And that little moment of laughter kind of eased all the tension. And all of a sudden, it just felt like, you know what, this is going to work. We just kind of fit together and have a good rapport. And somebody told us we needed to fake that again for the next service. We didn't do that, but it did kind of set the tone for that moment. It kind of eased everything. It's like, okay, I think this is going to be all right.
So as an introduction in that setting, how would you say, not because the microphone didn't work and it just became natural in that regard, but talk a bit about when new individuals such as LG steps on stage, what are you looking for with that first time in front of the church, the community, and the congregation? Well,
Yeah, you want, what you really want is to be able to create an environment for them to be genuinely them. If they're too worried about, am I doing this right? Am I doing this like Daryl would do it, or am I looking? Then people aren't going to get the best look at them. And what I found is people really genuinely, they think they know us, whether they know us or not. Like you see them at Walmart, they feel like they know you, and we've never had a conversation outside of maybe hi and bye in the lobby. But because of that, and because we tried to truly, one of the things we strive for is transparency, and to just be who we are on stage, not pretend to be people who don't mess up, but even share when we mess up. And so anyway, that's what you want. You want to be able to remove, when you have them step up there, you want to remove all those barriers that stop them from being who they truly are and are gifted to be. And so that's kind of the goal there that we have with that. And so, you know, with LG and I, we both are guys that like to read through our manuscript multiple times before we preach. And I'm more of a thought-for-thought guy. He's probably more of a word-for-word guy because he's got a great memory that way. If you look at my manuscript on Sunday, the people trying to follow them back, God love them. It's not easy, but because I'm more thought-for-thought than word-for-word. But, you know, you just, and everybody does a little bit different,
So you're each preparing your individual sermons for the week that you'll be on stage and Sunday delivering the message. Do you ever run things past one another? Is there ever a dry run where you hear each other's?
Every week.
Every week, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it the full sermon? Is it?
We read each other's full sermon
Okay.
every week. We don't preach it to each other. But I'm an outward processor, so I've talked through mine a lot more probably than what he does. I'll say, how's this sounding? But yeah, so generally Thursday, we'll get a manuscript from one another on the weeks we're preaching, and we'll try to go in and make some comments. I love this. I like this. Hey, maybe you could add this. Oh, I remember this Tim Keller quote. It would go great here. Maybe you need a little more of this. Usually there's 5 or 6 comments, most of them encouraging comments, then a couple of constructive additions. Or maybe this is a little, or sometimes I'll say, hey, this is way too long. Tell me what I can cut. And so he can look through and say, well, it's good, but you could probably do without this section. And that's kind of the feedback we give each other.
Share your experience there.
Yeah, it's always, having just another mind on something is always so helpful, that you put your thoughts in, you've been zeroed in on this, and kind of getting that outside perspective. Someone reads it, and it's like, well, have you thought about this? And you got somebody like Daryl who's got, 10 more years plus of experience in preaching, and there's a lot of illustrations that he's thought of and used, and like, hey, I remember, when I taught this before, using something like that, like you said, a Tim Keller quote, or something like that. And those comments are always super helpful, and it helps. Same as we have 2 voices. It is funny how many people will say, how they connect better with something Daryl says, or how I just relate to the way you brought that out. Well, that same benefit of 2 voices comes into just giving comments on a sermon, or different perspective.
And when he says something really good on Sunday, I'll lean over to my wife and say, I gave you that. That's smart.
So typically, when do you each like to have the sermon wrapped up? Ready to
Thursday.
go. Thursdays?
I like to have my manuscript done Thursday at noon so that I can do media slides for, because our media people have a goal of having it to them by 3 o'clock on Thursday. So if I'm done with the manuscript, then I can go through and say, okay, this would be a good slide, this would be a good slide, this would be a good slide. So that's the target. It doesn't always happen. But rarely do I leave here without something I could preach on Thursday.
Ever a time where you've had to make a change after Thursday, or you felt like you needed to make a change?
Oh, yeah. Whether it's, a main point that you want or an illustration you're sliding in, that's almost regular. That what's turned in, it's done on Thursday, but it's never really done until you're on stage preaching it. And
It's not done until the end of third service.
Right. I've had something pop in my head that morning when I'm, Sunday morning reading through it, and you think, oh, you know what, this is, I'd love to do this with it. You just kind of put that in there. You go down and edit a slide last minute. But for the most part, like Daryl said, like I'm not preaching this week, so I'm looking ahead to, what's kind of coming up and trying to get some ideas and study on it. And then you really buckle down and start writing that week up, which we should probably be a little further ahead. But
Yeah, we would that's our goal, to be
goal.
about 4 or 5 weeks ahead. Because we'll often think, oh, that would have been good there, but it's too late,
Yeah.
So,
You always put it in the file for later, right, in that regard.
but I do have to, I shouldn't say have to, because you don't have to, but I do feel best when I've lived with a text the week I'm going to preach it. So I think that's the main reason I don't get too far ahead, because it's kind of like living with it and wrestling with it all week. Then it just feels even more fresh when I preach it. So.
We'd like to build on that. LG's going to stick around for another podcast episode, but what I wanted to highlight, when you think about the church's mission and the message of love God, love people, you all just described it, and how you work with one another, and how the church wants to represent with the congregation every Sunday, and even on Mondays through Sunday, if you will, just that connection piece, that connectivity piece in that setting. But thanks for being here. I want to dive into the younger LG and the ministry step, and talk more about family in the next episode. But thank you for being here, my friend.
Thanks for having me.